Good afternoon, François.
Hi.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna. It's early here. It's even early for Kadi, I think. Right? It's 8 a.m. there, right? Yeah. She's very awake for 8 a.m. Can I
A
imagine
coffee.
myself here at 8? I had coffee. It's not coffee. Don't lie to me. Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon, wherever you are. And I hope you're excited for this morning. We're going to talk about React Native, and we're also going to talk about some testing stuff. So it's a little bit of both. And I'm going to start with asking everyone here to introduce themselves and please tell me the time of where you are because I actually think it's kind of funny that we're all in completely different times. Except me and Kadi, it's just an hour. Gleb, can you start? I'm going counterclockwise.
Absolutely, Sarah. Thank you. I'm Gleb Bahmutov, open source developer. I work at Mercari US, so I work with Japan, right? We just talked about time zones. So for me, it's all evenings. And I'm in Boston, so for me, it's 3 a.m., so middle of the night. That's why such a nice lighting.
Moody.
But it's very moody, but it's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Sarah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about? Sorry, I forgot to add that.
That's true. I'm going to talk about testing React Native projects that run using expo.io as a tool, because if you can actually run your React Native project in a browser, there are so many great tools for testing, which is kind of like a nice shortcut. And I'll show what I've done for testing React Native apps in a browser.
Nice. Kadi?
Oh, hello. So yeah, I'm Kadi. I'm in London. It is 8 a.m. bright and early. It's the earliest I've been up in a while, which is great. So I'm going to be, so I'm a principal engineer at Formidable. So build things in JavaScript primarily in React Native. So at Formidable, so build things in JavaScript primarily in React Native. So I've been working with React Native for the past 3.5 years, so quite a long time. And I'm going to be talking about kind of adding haptics and sounds and micro animations to applications. So a lot of the time when we build React Native projects, well, when we build any mobile project, you use a simulator or an emulator, and then things like tactile feedback you kind of forget about because as you're building it, you can't feel it. But it really enhances the user experience of your app. So I'm just gonna go through how you would add those things to your application, and just to illustrate firstly how much it adds, and secondly how surprisingly easy it is to do.
Nice. I'm just gonna ask you, I think I know what it means, but can you tell me what haptics is for anyone who's not there? I think it's when you click it and it does buzz on you. But
yeah, so haptic feedback is like any kind of tactile feedback, meaning you can feel it, that an electronic device does. So in the world of mobile development, it's mainly the vibration. So if you like a tweet or add something to your cart, you'll get a little ping like that you can feel on your phone.
Yeah, like when you send messages by default on Android, every time you click on a thing, it just it starts. It's but every character. It's not. Yeah, I know what you mean. Thank you.
Yeah, use with caution. Don't do every character.
Don't do every character, Android. Pick on this one out because it's really annoying after a while. Okay, and next we have François.
Hi, I'm François. It is 5 p.m. here in Sydney, Australia. We've been in lockdown for about 2 months, I think. We have another month to go before everyone is vaccinated. I call myself a developer happiness engineer because I'm kind of passionate about developer tooling. I basically left my job a few months ago to just build developer tools, and I'm just kind of seeing where it takes me. But so far it's been quite fun. So today I'm not going to be talking about React Native. I'm going to be talking about Vidshot, which is a screenshot tool. I'm actually not just going to be talking about Vidshot. I'm going to also be talking about Storybook, Cypress, Playwright, a bunch of different tools that you can use to take screenshots and just to do visual testing in general, as opposed to just the usual kind of testing that you're probably used to, like unit testing and integration testing, etc. So yeah, I'm pretty pumped to hear about the other talks as well. I've been meaning to try React Native for a while. I kind of tried it out a couple of years ago, but haven't touched it since. But it looks quite exciting as well.
Okay, awesome. Is everyone ready to go? Mostly you, François. Are you ready to go? Is everyone pumped?
It's a recorded video, so.
You did not. no one knew. I mean, you could have worn the same shirt you did on the video. I've done that. You just wear the same shirt, but I had my haircut, so it didn't work very well. But you know, you can try your best. Okay, yeah. So we're gonna start with François' talk. He's gonna talk about Vidshot, which he's gonna go all in about what it does. It looks really cool. I also have a tab of it open. It looks really cool, so I'm really excited to learn more. So yeah, François, take it away. Video of François, take it away.
Hey everyone, my name is François, and today I'm going to be talking about Vidshot, an open source tool I created that helps you generate screenshots from your components in just a few seconds. First, a bit of background about me. As you can probably tell from my name, I'm French, but I'm also Australian. I've been living in Australia for about 10 years now. I'm quite passionate about developer tooling, and that's why I call myself a developer happiness engineer. I think at the end of the day, developer tooling is what makes or breaks an engineer. And happier engineers create better outcomes for users at the end of the day. As part of that, I recently created a tool called React Preview that I'm going to be talking about a bit more later. Now, consider this app. It's called Hungry. Think of it like Deliveroo or Uber Eats. There are 2 engineers working on it, Alice and Bob. They're following best industry practices. So they have tests, they do code reviews, all the right things. Bob likes to make sure that the code is as clean as it can be. And he sees that there's a class name here that doesn't seem to be needed in the menu picker. So he removes it. Of course, he reruns the jest snapshots. So you can see on the right here clearly what changed in the HTML. And then he sends that to Alice. Alice receives that, and she clearly understands what's changed, but it's not clear visually what was the outcome of that change. And really, the only way for her to know that is by checking out that branch and spinning it up in her laptop and just looking at it, comparing it to the main branch, etc. This is where we hit the limits of the jest snapshots. They're great for diffing HTML, but they don't give you much information about what is the visual outcome, especially when it comes to CSS. This is why visual testing is important. Now, by visual testing, what I mean mostly is generating screenshots automatically. Let's take a look. If you want to take screenshots of your entire app or website, you can already use quite a few tools. For example, Cypress, Puppeteer, or Playwright. They basically control the browser and let you take a screenshot of any page you want. For example, here with Playwright, we can, in just 7 lines of code, spin up Chromium, then tell it to go to localhost 3000, where our app is already running, take a screenshot and save it as PNG before closing Chromium. This takes only a couple of seconds, and because it's running in headless, it doesn't even pop up on your screen or anything. Here's the outcome with the Hungry app. The nice thing about screenshots at the level of your entire app is that they give you a great understanding of the end user experience, and they're also super easy to set up. However, if your screens are quite complex, obviously your screenshots are going to be quite complex as well. Imagine Amazon.com with probably hundreds of components. That gets quite complex, and especially if any of these components changes, of course the screenshot will have to change. The other thing is that if you have any component that depends on external states, for example time or some externally fetched configuration, it also means that some parts of your screenshot may change without the code under the hood actually changing. That makes it really hard to compare between screenshots A in commit A and screenshot B in commit B, because you don't know what changes were caused by changes in the code or not, and there's no way to automate it. So that's what can make this kind of screenshots a bit brittle for use as visual testing. This is why component level testing is quite useful instead. First, let's talk about Storybook. Storybook is a tool that helps you generate a gallery of your components in different states that you can share with designers, product managers, or simply your teammates. Here's an example of configuration of 2 stories, so default and picked here. As you can see, they take different args. Then that generates two different variants in the Storybook server that you can spin up either locally or deploy. And by clicking on each of them, I can see my component in different configurations. The nice thing about Storybook is that it has open source plugins like StoryCap. StoryCap generates screenshots from each of your stories. Here's an example. I run yarn StoryCap and pass it the URL of my storybook. What it does is finds the storybook, opens Chrome, then figures out what all the stories are and takes screenshots of them. As you can see here, it did take 45 seconds or so to take the screenshots. I'm not entirely sure why, but it is true that Storybook in general is not the fastest tool on the market, simply because it's based on Webpack, which is starting to show its age. An alternative to StoryCap is to use Chromatic. Chromatic is actually the name of the company that is behind Storybook in the first place, so they're well placed to make a good tool for it. What Chromatic does is it deploys your storybook and then also generates snapshots of each of your stories in the cloud for collaboration. First, here I'm running Chromatic locally. It builds my storybook, deploys it, it runs some tests as well, and then it triggers the generation of snapshots. As you can see here, it captures some snapshots. And then for each of your pull requests, it gives you a nice interface where you can review it. For example, ask your designer to review the screenshots. So here's a video that I took from their website that kind of highlights the power of it. Now, if you have Storybook already set up, it's probably a great source of screenshots. As long as you don't mind it being a little bit slow, it might be all you need. The only thing is some of these stories might not be best suited for visual testing. Let's say you have a date picker that shows the current date. Well, it's still, because it depends on the external time, it does mean that the screenshots might change depending on when they were taken as opposed to what code changed behind it, which makes it difficult to identify visual changes. That can be an issue. This is kind of why I started investigating other solutions, and that's why I created Vidshot, which is an open source tool that is specifically designed just to take screenshots as fast as possible. Here's an example of a configuration of screenshots with Vidshot. As you can see here, I have a file that ends with .screenshot.tsx. It also works with JSX, of course. That's how Vidshot knows where the screenshots are, and it exports two components that don't have any props. Each of them is going to become one screenshot. Here I'm going to run Vidshot, and in a couple of seconds it's going to generate the two screenshots that I want. You can see that it did take 6 seconds, but actually most of that time is spent just spinning up Chrome and just tearing it back down. Here's a more elaborate example on a more complete code base where I run Vidshot, and it's going to generate quite a few screenshots. As you can see, it doesn't even take 1 second per screenshot. Vidshot is built on top of Vit, which is an alternative to Webpack. It's a lot faster and a lot simpler. The reason why Vit is faster than Webpack is simply because Vit means fast in French. But no, really, the main reason is because it's built on top of ESBuild, which is a very, very fast JavaScript bundler. Vit also does really smart things with only loading whatever needs to be loaded thanks to support for ES modules in modern browsers. Because Vidshot is built on top of Vit, pretty much any CSS you throw at it just works. Whether it's emotion, styled components, CSS modules, or even Tailwind, that just works. If you use SVG-R, meaning that you want to import SVG files as React components, that will also work out of the box. If you use TypeScript, there is again no configuration required because Vit supports TypeScript out of the box. One thing that's quite useful with Vidshot is that you can add async before screenshot hooks, which lets you configure and interact with your component before you actually take the screenshot. Here, I want to take a screenshot of a specific component after tapping into the search bar something to make sure that there are no results, and I want to see specifically the empty state. So what I do here is I just use plain vanilla JavaScript to type into my search bar And that's the screenshot that we get as a result. The other thing with Vidshot is that you can configure viewports quite easily. Here I set up laptop, tablet, and mobile viewports, and automatically I will get one variant of the screenshot for each viewport that I have configured. It's just 2 extra lines of code in your config. Vidshot also supports a bunch of different frameworks. It's not actually just React. It also supports Preact, Solid, Svelte, and Vue 3. So if one day you feel like shopping around for another framework, Vidshot will still be there for you. Here's an example of how to set up Vidshot in a Create React app. It's literally one command, Vidshot init. First, I run Vidshot init. It will detect what framework I'm currently using in this project and create the config file for me. Then Vidshot will work. The first time it takes a little bit longer because it has to prepare dependencies. And here we have the screenshot ready. That probably looks familiar to you if you use Create React app before. Now we've talked about how to generate screenshots with Vidshot, but what about the next steps? What do you do with these screenshots? The first thing is making sure that your screenshots are consistent. For example, if Alice uses Windows whereas Bob uses macOS, a lot of times they will end up with slightly different renderings of the same component, even if they use the same browser and the same version. Because of that, I would tell you to always generate your screenshots on CI or perhaps in Docker, at least somewhere where you completely control all of the dependencies and versions. If you choose to run Vidshot on GitHub Actions, for example, you can actually use Vidshot-P, which will detect all of the updated screenshots, create a commit for them, and push them on your branch. This means that I can just not worry at all about Vidshot. I can just make the changes to my components locally, push that to GitHub, and then a couple of minutes later, a couple of new commits will appear with the new screenshots on Linux, Windows, or whatever else I have configured GitHub Actions for. Now, here's an example of diffing images on GitHub. This is out of the box on GitHub. You have a few different modes that you can choose from. I find this is one of the most helpful. You can see in this case that Bob actually introduced the bug when he made that small cleanup PR. So one option is to simply keep your screenshots in Git like I've just shown. If you do that, I would highly encourage you to use Git LFS, large file storage, which offloads the actual storing of images somewhere else, so that the history of your Git repo won't bloat over time. An alternative would be to use a tool like RegSuite, which lets you, for example, upload your screenshots on S3, and it has plugins for GitHub and GitLab to comment on your pull request to tell you if anything changed in the diffs. So, for example, sometimes it will just tell you, hey, nothing changed, which is exactly what you want when you want to make sure that you haven't broken anything. Or lastly, you can use a tool like Percy, which is a platform that takes the HTML, CSS of your components and actually renders it in their own cloud on Chrome, Firefox, etc. And they will have a really nice interface where you can compare screenshots and review them independently from GitHub, just like you can with Chromatic. Last but not least, Vidshot integrates perfectly with React Preview, which is another tool I created that I mentioned earlier. React Preview is an extension for your IDE. It's currently available for Visual Studio Code and will soon be also for IntelliJ and WebStorm. It allows you to look at a preview of individual React components and see it live update as you type. Here's an example. I have this counter component and I'm opening in React Preview. Then I want to kind of tweak the color, so I want to make the background red and maybe change the color of the text, add a bit of padding, and lastly change the plus and minus color. And I have this screenshot button. The screenshot button generates the screenshot that you need for Vidshot. As you can see, it's exactly what we need, and now we can run Vidshot, and it will generate all of the screenshots. And now we have exactly the screenshot we were expecting. Now, just one note is that this specific feature hasn't actually been released yet. It's something that I hacked up in advance for this talk, but it is coming very soon to React Preview. If you want to learn more, check out reactpreview.com. That's about it for Vidshot. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to vidshot.com to check out the documentation. If you have any feedback, it's very early days for Vidshot, so don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. You had some really good feedback. It's a really nice tool and it looks really, really useful and fast. We do have a couple of questions. We have one from YouTube and I'm gonna, yeah, there we go. So how would it work on the dynamic date component, for example, that you talked about? So if you have dynamic data, there's a typo.
Yeah. So in general, I would say when it's a bit of a different case than Storybook, where you just want to show your interactive components. When you want to take screenshots, a lot of times you want to actually show very static components. So I wouldn't show the date picker itself. I would either mock out the dates where you can pass a prop and you can set it to a specific date that will never change, or actually potentially split up that component into the connected component part that is kind of linked to external state, including time, and the visual components, which is what you actually care about for Vidshot, which is just purely static, and it just takes a bunch of props. It doesn't know anything about what else is happening outside of it.
Okay, yeah. So your idea, like the main way to go around this is just like make components that are purely visual, because that's what you're supposed to be testing right now. Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Okay, we have one question from Gleb. Do you want to ask it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. François, this is amazing. I really love it. The question is, you said it's built on top of Vite. It can guess how to handle your CSS modules. It can handle TypeScript. But what if I have a complicated, let's say, config already, like a Webpack config in my project, like most big projects have? Can you hook into that and use that to bundle?
So from my experience, a lot of really complicated Webpack configs, once you switch to Vite, end up being very, very simple configs, just because Webpack kind of requires you to use a lot of different plugins, whereas Vite has a lot of very reasonable defaults that just kind of work for everyone. So to answer your question, no, it does not hook into your bundler or whatever else. It's kind of completely independent. But there is support for aliases, for like SVGR, etc. The one thing that is kind of powerful is that you can pass a custom Vite config. So if it's possible to run your project with Vite, which is kind of the case for the majority of projects, it is possible to run it with Vidshot as well.
Unbelievable. Thank you.
Nice. Okay, we have at least one more question. Julio, do you want to ask it, or do you want me to ask it?
Yeah. So I'm curious about this. Like you mentioned that there is a cost related to running Chrome. So is it possible to run Chrome in the background, like in daemon mode, so that it will just hang around there and you call it give me a screenshot? Probably.
I mean, I don't know if Playwright or Puppeteer offer that. By the way, Vidshot is built on top of Playwright. But what I could quite easily introduce, and now I'm thinking I might implement this over the weekend, is kind of a daemon mode for Vidshot, which is that it kind of starts up in the background and spins up Chrome for you, and then you can just rerun it as much as you want. Or maybe actually a watch mode. Watch mode was on my list. I'm gonna build it.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I was muted, sorry. Okay, cool. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free. Unless it's about asking for a watch mode, is already on it. And yeah,
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say that was awesome.
Thank you.
It was really cool. It's a really cool project, and it's really fun. Like, we're just so used to these types of testing being so slow that it's just, we got accustomed to the fact that they take like 10 seconds each screenshot, because each screenshot like has to like, do 10,000 things. So this will, I think, make testing in terms of screenshot testing way faster and way better. People will stop. Oh, are you looking at performance often? Is this a metric that you take into consideration? Or is just that Vite is fast?
That is a good question. Really, so there are two reasons why Vidshot is fast. The first one is that it uses Vit, and the team behind Vit puts so much effort into making sure that it's as fast as it can be. And really, like Vidshot is actually very simple. I think it's less than 500 lines in total, like the entire code base. All it does really is spin up a page and then load each of your components, all of them, and just loop through them. And it loops and just shows one component, takes a screenshot, shows the next component, takes a screenshot. So it doesn't even have to reload the page or anything. And that's why it's fast. That's the other reason why it's fast. So I'm not specifically looking at the performance, but I don't think there are specific reasons why it would go slower over time.
And the last question is there bottlenecks you're aware of, like things that you know can't be faster than they are right now?
Well, obviously, the component has to be ready before you take the screenshot. And by default, Vidshot will just render your component and immediately take a screenshot of that. But you can set up a before screenshot async hook that I mentioned. If your before screenshot hook, for example, relies on waiting for something to load over the network or anything like that that is just slow by nature, then of course taking the screenshot will be slow. So in general, I would just tell you ideally just never use before screenshot because that's as fast as you can make it. But it's there as a utility if you need it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have one more question. So
go.
Yeah, so with this kind of operation, it's something you can run very much in parallel. So have you tried playing around with parallelization so that you will generate a lot at the same time?
That is the other feature that is on the list coming very soon along with Watch. It's actually fairly simple to implement if you think about it. All you need to do is kind of split up all of your screenshot files into buckets of approximately equal size and just run Vidshot in parallel. Even with the same kernel, just in different tabs. And you can totally
exactly.
do that.
Yeah. And I guess the next level is that you do service offering, you push it to the cloud and ask some money for it. So
that is on the list as well.
Yeah. Okay. So weekend projects for you. Thanks.
Thank you.
My final question is: are you gonna support Firefox? Since I think Playwright supports Firefox as well.
So one thing I didn't mention is Chrome is just a default configuration, but it's because it's using Playwright. All you need to do is just change it in your config to Firefox. Just check out the docs on vidshot.com. It's explained how to use Firefox. There's also Edge and WebKit as well that is supported.
Okay, cool. Are you thinking about building something where you can take screenshots on all of them and serve those as different screenshots?
Yes.
Also on the list? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yes, thought this
How long is this list?
I don't know, but it sounds quite
long.
big, and it's literally all our questions is like, it's on the list. I have already thought this through. Okay, this was really cool. I will definitely keep an eye out for Vidshot. Thank you so much, François. This was a really cool talk, really amazing project. You are definitely a developer happiness engineer. It makes sense now. Okay, so next up we have Gleb, and he's going to talk about integration testing in React Native, putting that React Native in the web and making it testable. Take it away, man.
Hi, everyone. This is Gleb Bahmutov, a Senior Director of Engineering at Mercari US. Thank you so much to React Finland for inviting me today to speak about integration testing for React Native apps. If you want to follow my work, find me at gleb.dev. So you want to write a mobile app, right? No problem. You just learn how to code for iOS using Xcode. Maybe you learn Android programming, and half a year later you start making an app, right? No. So if you want to write a mobile application, I suggest today you learn React. You probably already know React because you're watching this talk. But once you learn React, you install React Native library, which will allow you to write a React application, convert it into mobile applications, upload it to the store, and use it like normal apps, because they are normal apps. And once you do that, it's all profit. Now, a lot of companies have already converted their native mobile applications to React Native platform. In fact, this icon is Mercari US. we have publicly announced that we have retired our mobile applications and that we are replacing them with React Native project. You can learn our reasoning in the blog post. In the future, we even plan to maybe share some of the code for React Native mobile platform with React UI code we're using for our React web app. That's a future plan. So here's a typical React Native application. Notice it looks a lot like your React web application, only instead of using divs and paragraphs to show content on the screen, you use tags, view, and other widgets from React Native third-party package. Other than that, it's pretty standard application, right? You import components, your logic, and just use it. You can create other components that use other React Native parts, but other than that, it's standard React. All those components will be translated into the presentation elements on each mobile platform. You can even write code that, depending on the platform, can use different code paths and different source files. For example, the header can be implemented in header.android and header.ios.js. And depending on the platform, React Native will use the right file. The big question here is, are you sure your application is working? If you go to React Native documentation, under the testing page, the first line of defense to answer this question will be use ESLint and static checks using Flow or TypeScript. Makes sense. For unit tests, we suggest using Jest with Jest DOM and a special React Native renderer. Okay, you can write some component tests to make sure, yeah, the header is there. But to test the full application, the suggestion is to use end-to-end test tool that actually works with converted, exported mobile application like Detox and Appium. Now, nothing against those tools, but the workflow is kind of slow, and those tools have no visibility into your application. Here's a middle ground, or a middle way. If you take React Native application, you can export it not to the mobile platform, but for the browser, for the web platform. The very popular tool Export does just that. It can take your React Native app, convert it to the mobile, or show it in a browser. If you can show your app in a browser, you can use something like Cypress Test Runner to test that application running on a URL. Now, full disclosure, I used to work for Cypress. I love it as a tool, so that's what I'm going to use in this presentation. One thing about Export. Export is a super nice tool. All the code examples at React Native Dev site are using Export to show it right away, and you can modify it. Here, I'm modifying and replacing some of the text, and it immediately uses hot module replacement to show the result in the browser. Here's a typical result in the browser. Here's a typical React Native application. I'm going to import React and its hooks from standard React library. I'm going to import activity indicator and all the representational components from React Native. I can fetch the data using the hook and the standard fetch mechanism. I can handle the data and set it, or I can handle the errors. And I can create a view that will show the loading indicator if isLoading is true. Otherwise, it will show the loaded list of users. I'm iterating through the list and I'm creating text items. Now let's write a test. This is a very simple Cypress test. I'm going to visit the URL and I'm going to look for elements with data test attributes equals user and make sure that there are more than 3 items there. Now, I don't know exact number, but I assume there is more than 3 users. Now, this assumes that Export translates the React Native application into something that's equivalent and runs on the web, iOS, and Android. And I do believe for most cases, this is true. Now, we're going to configure Cypress to look at localhost 19,006, which is default port when Export is serving the application. And here's our app being tested. The application behaves just like a normal app. It fetches the list, it shows it on a page, and we're confirming that those items really are present. Now, we don't know how many items will be fetched from the server, so how can we spy on a network call to actually know the number of users to expect? Cypress has this intercept command that can set up a network spy. We save it as an ls users. Then we're going to visit the page and we'll wait for this network call to happen. We'll get its response body and check if it's an array and if there are more than 5 users in that array. And then we're going to look at the DOM and make sure that the number of users displayed is equal to the number of users in the response from the server. And here's how it looks. You can see the UI for everything the Cypress does. You can debug it easier. And whenever you change the code, immediately the application is re-rendered and you can rerun the test. What about the loading indicator itself? While application is fetching the data, it's displaying the loading activity indicator. Well, again, take intercept command. It has capability of taking the response, delaying it by, let's say, in this case, 1 second, and then allowing it to continue. We're going to visit the page and we're going to check that the loading indicator is displayed. Then we're going to check if it disappears because the data should come back after 1 second. And here's how it runs. And this is a recording. Again, for 1 second, you see the spinner, and then it disappears, and the users are displayed. You don't want to rely on the backend to always return you the data. Sometimes you want to return a very specific response. Cypress allows you to respond with a fixture. The fixture is loaded from a JSON file and is substituted as a response. So the app doesn't go all the way to the server, but it thinks it does. So in this case, we're going to respond with a fixture that contains 3 users, and we're going to confirm that 3 users is displayed on the page. Even difficult logical paths, for example, unhappy path. What does your application do when it hits an error? In our case, it just prints a message to cancel error. We can test this by forcing the reply with a network error using intercept, checking and stubbing or spying on cancel error method, and then confirming that once the loading indicator goes away, that the log error method was really called. Whatever your application does when it hits a network error, we can confirm right there in Cypress test. Nice. The application should be accessible. So before that, I use data test ideas because everything else, all the classes and all the attributes, the generation is controlled by React Native, and those stylings are all dynamic. I cannot select elements using that. But you can also specify area hints and attributes when you're writing React Native app. In fact, it's a good idea. And then you can use those accessibility labels that will be translated into data area label and data area hints, right? Attributes, so that you can select something like this. Get elements by area label equals app is loading users. Should be visible, right? Instead of using test ideas. So those area labels will also be generated in the mobile app. So anyone using a reader to interact with the app can also interact with the application. Again, select the elements using area labels. This is just scratching the surface. If you want full accessibility check, you can bring a Cypress X plugin. And anytime you want to check the whole page, you can say check accessibility. This plugin will find so many issues, I guarantee it. Everything from color contrast to a lack of labels to the structure of your document. Now, did we just test everything, right? I showed a couple of tests. We probably covered some of them, but maybe not. So the way we can confirm that we truly tested our React Native application is by adding code instrumentation while it's running in the browser. The React Native application, when it runs in the browser, is transpiled. It's transpiled using Babel. What else, right? So we can insert the plugin, Istanbul, which will instrument the code, and then we can use standard Cypress code coverage plugin to generate reports. The generate report in our case will show that yes, everything inside app.js application code or any components that it uses locally has been instrumented and covered by the end-to-end tests. Another question that comes up, does my application look good? Now, the computers cannot answer that. But what they can answer very, very well, does your application look the same as before? Did you accidentally change something? So did you shift the styling? Did you, cover one element with another? So for this, you can use any visual plugin that Cypress supports, right? And the way it looks, for example, when you use Cypress Percy plugin is once in a while when you interact with a page, after you confirm that it has the information rendered, you say Cypress snapshot and give it a name. And let's say we change something. Let's say we made a pull request that actually improves accessibility of those buttons and the completed text. They have a much higher contrast now. Now the visual plugin will compare those two images pixel by pixel and will tell you, hey, this particular area marked in red have changed. Do you approve it or not? And the developer can review this and say, yeah, that's what I meant to do. This is a good change. Approve it, and this image will become the new baseline. And all our test runs will be compared against the approved baseline. And the big question, $1 million question is, does this work? The assumption is the Expo generates a browser-compatible web app and runs it, showing to you how your application would behave and act on iOS and Android. And honestly, I trust it. Expo seems like a very good tool that truthfully generates a representation of your app that behaves just like it would on mobile device. It's used by a lot of projects already, and I trust that library a lot more than I trust my own code that I'm writing for the first time. I think that by testing the Expo browser version of my app, I'll find all the errors that creep up in my logic, in my data, coming from the backend errors are also tested. So I actually trust it to discover all the issues, all right, that would not be discovered otherwise. Again, there are parts of application that cannot be rendered in the browser. All, let's say, native components that don't have a representation inside the browser cannot be tested by running the app in the browser. In that case, I think those parts can be stopped and mocked from your code, right? And for those features, you should really write something using a detox or RPM test, okay? But I think 90% of your application can successfully be tested while the application is running in the browser before it gets exported and converted into the native mobile application. Thank you very much for listening. I put the slides online. I put all the descriptions of all the testing techniques for React Native in a browser under a couple of blog posts tagged React Native. If you have any questions, reach out. I'm on Twitter, and thank you and have a great rest of your day.
That was awesome as well. How are you feeling? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. It's always difficult to listening to yourself, you know.
Oh yeah, I know that. If you're
It's constant exposure. Just have yourself in the background.
It's not. Yeah, it's just so awkward, and you always listen, and you're like, why am I such an idiot? We have 2 questions from the audience in this call right now, and who wants to go first? Kadi, you can go first. Yes.
Sure. I mean, the question that I had, like, I typed out my question, but then, like, in the last slide, you kind of answered it. So, I mean, the way that React Native and, well, also Expo works is that you have your JavaScript code and there are mappings to iOS. So someone has gone like, okay, if you type in Vue, here is the native Vue on iOS that, like, you will use. And then in a completely different file in a code base, there's the equivalent to Android and equivalent to web. So that's why you can have like 3 approaches. So personally, I've never used React Native to actually build a web app. Obviously, I've seen the demo on Expo Web, but I've used Expo and plain React Native, but I only build iOS and Android apps. So in this approach, we're testing the web version of this mapping. So do you think there's enough value in that, like enough confidence? Like, would you use this approach to testing, even if you're actually never using Expo Web?
100% or 90%, right? But,
90%.
right. So here's an example. I mean, we all say we're writing web applications, we're writing mobile application. We're writing something that fetches data from the server, shows it to the user, and processes button clicks by sending it back to the server. Like we glorify data processors, right? And we write apps. So in my example, I'm fetching the list of users, showing it on a page, on a mobile screen, right? So the question is, if I'm testing that my application running using Expo in a browser is really fetching the list of users and really showing on a page, right? Do I trust it that when I run it on a mobile device, that it will fetch list of users and show it on a mobile device, right? Now, where is the error? The error could be that Expo doesn't implement fetch the same way, right? It could actually completely screw it up, right?
Mm.
But I guarantee that probably when I write this application, my error will not be in an Expo code. It will be I put a wrong URL, right? To fetch the users, right? It will fail in a web version and in a mobile version, right? Majority, I think, in my errors is how do I map props, how I handle the state updates, right? All these things will manifest itself in the web version, right? And so if I test that fully and then export into mobile device, I think all the logical errors that I tested will not be present on a mobile version, right? I'm happy to be proven wrong. And if you have an example where, hey, here's an app, it looks to be fine, right, in a web version, but completely is broken right here in a mobile version, I'll be happy, to look at this, right?
Yeah.
But so far, aside from like a few things, right, that really just are native code and cannot be run in the browser, I think it works pretty much the same way.
So just one follow-up question, sorry.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what's the benefit then of using this browser-based testing versus just using unit tests and snapshot tests?
Right. It gives you a whole view of how your application flow works when the user exercises it, right? Where you go to the server, you fetch items, and then they're rendered. I don't care how they implement it, right? So for me, it's only like, hey, the application is loading and shows the users. I don't care how many components there are. I don't care if it uses, set state or some kind of hooks, right? I'm testing the user flow rather than component implementation under the hood. So to me, that's a great value. And the speed, right? Compared to exporting to mobile application, launching the emulator, testing it using Appium. This is instant, right? Expo, hot module reloading, Cypress just watches the files, reruns it. And I have full browser DevTools, right? So people love using the browser DevTools to interact with the application and debug, especially during testing. That's why even in Node, right, you use the inspect breakpoint and you open DevTools. So having that for my mobile application in React Native, where you can install like React DevTools plugin, is absolutely incredible experience in my view.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I have a related question. Is it, since you can run React Native applications to Expo, can we use Vidshot to test them now?
So almost. So with Vidshot, from what I understand, and François, feel free to jump in to correct me. The Vidshot, the beauty of it is that it actually renders your components yourself. When you run React Native using Expo, the Expo is a bundler, right? It renders the full application. Now, what I've done recently was when you run it in a browser using Cypress, you can actually grab the static dump snapshot, right? Because it's already rendered during the test at each step. So you can grab it, and then if you have Playwright or Puppeteer standing by somewhere, right, you can just fed it and tell it, give me the image back. So once you have image, you can actually use image comparison tools. And like Francois was talking about Vidshot as a service to minimize cross-platform differences, because if I do it on Mac, and then you do it on CI on Linux, or you are using Windows, all these screenshots will be different. That's why I use third-party service like Percy, right? You can actually run your Puppeteer or Playwright as a service, let's say on AWS, and just take the DOM, right? The whole tree with styles, but no JavaScript because it's already been rendered by your test runner, and send it off, get back an image, and compare it. So it's almost like the most beneficial would be use Vidshot as a service rather than Vidshot itself to generate the DOM.
All right, thank you.
We have one question on YouTube, which is, what's the ratio you think you should have between like end-to-end integration and unit tests?
Okay, that's a great question. So the way I look at React Native, the true end-to-end would be the detox or RPM test on a mobile device, right? So what I'll call those Cypress tests running in a browser, I call them integration tests, because we integrated all the bunch of stuff, but we didn't really test the app. So I would call it integration. Now, then the question is how many of end-to-end integration or, just unit tests for React Native platform would you have? To me, the value is in testing what the user sees, right? Loading applications, seeing the loading indicator, like going through the story. So I would actually write more integration tests than unit tests. If I have a very hairy component, probably unit tests for that. But majority of my tests are integration. And for end-to-end, the true RPM or detox test at the end of the day would be just a few sanity checks for things I cannot cover with integration. So it's not a pyramid for me where it will be like unit, integration, end-to-end. It's almost like a diamond, right? Where a few unit tests, majority integration tests, and a few end-to-end tests using actual mobile test framework.
Does anyone have any other opinions, ideas on this? I think my only thing is that go, Kadi. Yeah.
I was just going to say I definitely write fewer tests than I should. My go-to tends to be not writing React component tests because components change way too often, and I don't like snapshot tests because of the reason that François, you mentioned that it's difficult to assess. Like, yes, the class name changed, but what does that mean? So I tend to write unit tests for complex functions. So if there's a function that has like lots of business logic, or I'm adding like a spacer for a credit card input, and like it's complicated, needs to handle Amex and Visa, I'd write tests for that, and that tends to be most of my tests.
Yeah,
some end-to-end. I need to like add some end-to-end tests, so I'm gonna definitely try your approach, Gleb, and see if that works.
François?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the thing that people don't talk about enough when it comes to testing is the return on investment. And for example, it really depends whether you work in a bigger team or in a smaller team. In a smaller team, you don't necessarily need as many tests, whereas in a bigger team, there are many more risks of other people breaking your things. So that might be more worth writing tests. As well, if you have, again, a lot of business logic, definitely you should be adding tests, not just for other potentially breaking your code, but also for yourself breaking your code, because that happens more often than you think. But if it's just something simple, maybe you do want to have some Vidshot tests because that's super easy to write and it just takes a couple of seconds. But you don't need unit tests for something simple because the code is going to be just as complicated as the test.
Yeah, I do tend to agree. I think that a lot of the times when we test React components, we're actually testing React instead of actually testing what we build. Like at my current job, we usually test the entirety of the page. Like, does it get this data? Does it show the data? Can you entirety of the page? Like, does it get this data? Does it show the data? Can you filter this data when you type on it? So it ends up kind of being more of an integration test than a unit test, because in the end, React tests itself, I guess. I think React has enough tests and React Native has enough tests. Yeah. Okay. I think unless anyone has really strong feelings about what I just said, but everyone seemed to be doing this, so I felt approved. So we can keep going. Yeah. Okay. So we have one more talk, and then in Finland they're going for lunch. And so right now we have Kadi, who's just going to talk to us about doing Haptic and fun stuff with React Native. Take it away.
Hello, and let's talk about haptic sounds and microanimations in React Native. So I have built this little app where you could purchase matcha lattes. So you can add it to your favorites or remove it from your favorites. You can choose between 1 and 3 matcha lattes to purchase, and you can add them to your cart. Now in this demo, we're going to go through this little UI that I already built, and we're going to use haptic sounds and microanimations to basically enhance it and make it a little bit nicer to use. Now, some of these things, haptic feedback in particular, are kind of difficult to convey in a video. So all this code is available on Expo Snack. So if you go on snack.expo.dev, add Kadi Kraman and haptics and microanimations, and then in the preview panel, choose My Device, you can scan the barcode and basically view this demo on your own phone. All right, let's start with haptic feedback. Haptic feedback is basically any kind of tactile feedback, meaning that you can feel it, that's produced by an electronic device. In the world of mobile development, haptic feedback is primarily just vibration. Now, my example is built using Expo, and this is because I wanted to make this available on Expo Snack. But you can do this on both Expo and plain React Native, so I've linked to libraries in both. In Expo, there is a library called Expo Haptics, so install it using Expo install Expo Haptics. And in plain React Native, there is a library called React Native Haptic Feedback, which you can install with Yarn or NPM. I've actually used both of these libraries, so they both work equally as well. Now, in the interest of speed, I've already installed these libraries to my demo project, and I've commented out the code that we're going to add, so I'm just going to talk through how it works. First thing we do is obviously import the haptics from Expo Haptics. Now let's have a look at where we would like to add it. Well, just starting at the top of the page, we could do haptic feedback, so a little vibration, if you have added something to your favorites. So if we scroll down to where we add things to our favorites, so we've got a icon here for the favorites. When we press on it, we handle toggle favorites. And here it is. Okay, so we've got use callback that says to favorite. And if it's not already your favorite, let's do this. So we call haptics, impact async, and here you can choose the strength or the vibration. So you can have a light, medium, or a heavy vibration. Now, another place we could use it is obviously the add to cart button, especially because this is an asynchronous request. So when you add to cart, we have a little bit of a delay until the cart is ready. So let's find where that button is. All right, so we have our CTA button here. It's got on press. It's called handle add to cart. And this is a use callback. Obviously, I'm emulating the loading here, but in your real application, this might be do an API request. So we could do haptics impact async, and let's do impact feedback style heavy, just to make it really obvious that something's changed. And the last thing we can really interact with here is the quantity picker. Now, this is actually quite cool because there are 3 types of haptic feedback, light, medium, and heavy. You could actually use the haptic feedback to indicate how many lattes you've chosen. So let's find the quantity picker. All right, so on press, we do handle select quantity. Okay, so here what we can actually do is based on the new quantity, if the quantity is 1, we'll do a haptics impact async and do the light feedback. If the quantity is 2, we could do a medium feedback. And otherwise, or in our case, if the quantity is 3, we could do a heavy feedback. So now if you press on these, this will give you the lightest feedback and this will give you the heaviest feedback. And that's just one example of how you could use the haptic feedback to communicate differences in scale. Haptic feedback is always also super handy if you have a slider component, just to indicate that a new option has been reached. Now, obviously, visually on the screen, you won't be able to tell the difference, but if you try this out on your phone on Expo Snack, you'll be able to see what it feels like. I've also added a little button to enable or disable enhancements, which will basically disable all the animations and haptic feedback and sound that we're going to add. And you'll be able to experience what it's like to use this little app with and without the enhancements. Now, next up, sounds. Now, sounds in mobile applications is quite interesting because when it comes to, for example, mobile games or video games, we expect everything to make sound. But a lot of the apps that we use day to day don't really make sound. And we can't really rely on sound too much because a lot of people don't have sound enabled. I mean, I, for one, always have my phone on silent mode. However, this can be a fun little enhancement that you could add for people who do have sound on. So again, there is an Expo and a plain React Native library for it that I've linked to. So in plain React Native, we got React Native Sound, which you can use. And in Expo, we have got Expo AV. So this is a catch-all library for both sound and video, which you can install using Expo install Expo AV. So again, I've added just a little code example just to give you an idea of how it works. Effectively, you choose a sound file, which can be within your application, or it can be downloaded from a remote URL. Then you create a sound object and you play it. Now let's go to our example. Where could we add a sound? Well, I was thinking it would be fun to have a little happy sound if you've added something to your favorites. So let's start by importing audio from Expo AV. And let's go down to where we have our handle toggle favorite callback. And underneath it, we have this play sound callback. So commenting this out, let's see what this does. It creates a sound using the Expo audio library. And we also need to pass it in the source of the sound. So I have a notification sound that I already packaged into this code base. Then we set the sound. So we have this React use state here to set the current sound. And finally, we call play async. So let's just uncomment this out. So now, if it's not currently your favorite, we do the haptic feedback and we also play a sound. So let's add this to our dependencies array as well. And now if you are using Expo AV, you'll also need to unload the sound once the component dismounts to prevent any memory leaks. So I've got a React use effect here that says, if we have a current sound in our use state, then unload it, otherwise do nothing. So this gets run when the component dismounts. And now when I add this to my favorites, you hear a little sound. And finally, we have microanimations. Now, microanimations are any UI animation that isn't strictly necessary. For example, sliding a menu open, or fading in an image, or scale a button on press. When done right, a lot of users don't even notice that microanimations are there, but they do add to the joy of using your application. There are loads of animation libraries available. In this demo, I'm going to use Reanimated 2, which is definitely my favorite. Reanimated 1 was originally built to mitigate some deficiencies in React Native's built-in animation library. But Reanimated 2 kind of went further, and effectively they made a hooks-based animation library for React Native, which is the easiest and most straightforward, in my opinion, to use if you're using functional components. This is available on both Expo and in plain React Native, and the installation instructions are available here. Now, let's use Reanimated to animate some things on the screen. Well, firstly, let's animate this heart when you add something to your favorites. So what I want to do is, if I'm tapping on this heart, it's already playing the sound, it's already giving me haptic feedback, but if I'm adding to my favorites, I'd also like this heart to kind of expand a little, so like a little pulse. So first thing that we want to do is let's import Reanimated from React Native Reanimated, and let's import use shared value and use animated style. A shared value is basically the value that you are going to be using as a central point for your animation, and use animated style is basically a hook that returns a style object that will contain the animated style. So you can use the shared values within this animated style object. So for the hearts, I've created a heart scale shared value. Now let's go to the toggle favorite. So what we want to do is we want to expand the heart and make it go back to normal. So let me just show you what happens if I don't use this. So let's do a heart scale dot value, and let's do 1.3. So if I add something to my favorites, it will increase the heart style to 1.3. Now let's go to the use animated style. So this is the style I'm going to apply to the heart. So I'm going to apply a transform with a scale. And this is pretty simple. It's just using the value of the shared value. And lastly, what we want to do is we want to use this heart style on our heart. And in order to do that, let's find where the heart is. Okay, here it is. So it's wrapped in a pressable. So I want to apply the animated style to the pressable. In order to apply the animated style to anything, it needs to be an animated component. So what we can do is we can use reanimated, so this is the default export, create animated component, and then pass in any component that we want. So in our case, we'll pass in pressable. And this is a reanimated pressable component. Now if we scroll down and replace this with reanimated pressable and save. And now if I add it to my favorites, you'll see that the heart kind of went really big, but obviously it doesn't go back. And also it jumped to really big, it didn't really animate. So in React Native Reanimated, we have a bunch of these with exports, with basically you can use to set the value to a new value, but gradually. So one of the most popular ones is with timing. So this basically creates a smooth transition. So if I go to this heart scale value, and rather than assigning it to 1.2, I do with timing and 1.3. And now when I click on this, you'll see that the heart kind of increases gradually rather than really quickly. Now, what we actually want is we want it to expand, but also then go back to normal. And then for that, we can use a with sequence export. And as the name suggests, it basically allows you to do multiple transitions one after the other. So now when I comment this out, we'll see that we do a sequence and we animate from our initial value to 1.3. And we can pass in an object to specify how quickly we want to do it. And then after that's done, we animate back to 1. And now when I add something to our favorites, you'll see that it does a little pulse. Next up, let's animate the add to cart button. So at the moment, when we add something to our cart, we get a little loading spinner, and that's pretty much it. So what we'd like to do is we want to make it more obvious that this button is disabled. So what I would like to do is make this button slightly smaller while it's loading, but also make the opacity lighter, so make it a little bit lighter so it makes it really obvious that it's disabled. So let's go to where the button is. So we have our CTA here. Notice that this is also a pressable component. So as before with the heart, we have to convert this into a reanimated component. So let's do reanimated pressable instead. And so I've got a shared value here already, which is called button scale. So we're going to start this with 1, as with the heart scale. And for the button style, so we've got a use animated style here. And let's start with just a transform. So this does exactly the same as the heart. So it uses the transform and scales based on the button scale. So let's apply this style to our button to convert this into an array. And add the button style. And now we also need to actually set the value as the add to cart action is ongoing. So if we go to this callback and we'll do, so button scale.value with timing. So we'll go from 1 to 0.9 and this animation should take 200 milliseconds. And then after we waited for a second and we've done the haptic feedback, and we've implemented the cart count, we will put the button scale value back to 1, so we'll go back to 100% the original size. Let's update the dependency array. One thing I've noticed when working with Reanimated 2 is that hot reloading doesn't always work as expected. So whenever editing the styles, it's a good practice to just reload the app completely just to make sure that you have the latest version. All right, now when I press the add to cart button, you can see that it scales down, and once the add to cart action is finished, it will scale back up. Now, one cool thing about these values is that you can use the same value for multiple things. I would like this button to also be dimmed when it's smaller. So to do that, we can update the opacity. Now, here's a keyword that we haven't. And basically what this does is we pass in the value that we are using to do the animation, and then we pass in two arrays. So this is basically a mapping from this array to this. So the first array is basically the expected scale. So we know that we only set the button scale between 0.9 and 1. And what we're saying is that if it's 0.9, make this opacity 0.5, so 50% opacity. If this value is 1, make the opacity 1, but also handle all of these values in between. So it will automatically know, for example, if you have, 0.95, it will do 0.75, so 75% opacity, and it will automatically handle all the values in between. So let's save that and refresh the app. And now when I add to cart, you'll see that I'll have both animations at the same time. And the last animation what we had was the amount picker. So at the moment, there's no animation here, but I thought it would be nice if this would fade in rather than just snapping in. Now, a way to do that is, again, using a shared value. So I've got a quantity item here. So this component is for each of these buttons. So it knows whether it's selected, what to do when you press it. The children is just a number. The children is just a label. Now we're going to start with creating a shared value. So we'll do, if the item is selected, we'll start with 1, otherwise we'll start with 0. So these will be the two values that we're going to be toggling in between. Now, at the moment, we do, okay, if it's selected, display this, otherwise display this. One easy way to do fade animations is basically to render both of the items on top of each other and then animate the opacity the opposite way. So what I'm going to do is remove this inline if, and also I'm going to convert these views into reanimated views. Now, some of the core components like view and text are actually built into reanimated. So instead of creating a reanimated component, you can do reanimated.view, and this will make it into a reanimated view. Now, this means that we can pass in animated styles. Now, we'll need to have two styles. So we need to have a selected style and a not selected style. And both of them will handle opacity of the item. So the selected style, the opacity will just be the current value. So if it's selected, the opacity is 1. If it's not selected, the opacity is 0. For the not selected style, we want to do the opposite. So we can use the interpolate function. So we pass in our value, and we basically create this mapping function. So we go from 0 to 1, but we want to map that to 1 to 0. So this creates the opposite effect and also animates all the values in between. Now let's pass these styles into the views. So the selected and not selected. Now all that's left to do is actually update this value when the selected state changes. So to do that, we can use a use effect. And because we have is selected in the dependencies array, we'll know that this effect gets run whenever is selected changes. Now, if is selected changes, we will go to this use effect, and we will assign the new value for this my value. That's why you should name them something other than value. And we will use the timing function, and basically we're doing if is selected is true, let's change it to 1, otherwise let's change it to 0, and let's take 400 milliseconds to do that, which will create the animation. Now this effectively will update these two styles so that the selected version of this view will get opacity 1 and the not selected one will get opacity 0. Now let's refresh, and you'll see that when I change this, you'll see a little fade animation. That's it for me. I hope you enjoyed it, and here is the QR code if you want to try it out on your phone. Thanks very much.
I just want to say that definitely made the app so much better. Yeah. Exactly. It totally
That's-
changes the experience. Like I don't know. I don't think this exists in a lot of countries, but there's this app in some parts of Europe called Waltz. That's for food delivery. And it's just all of the little animations that they do are the main reason I use that app. Because it's really good. Like you can play a game when you're waiting for food, and you can't beat that. Just download it and pretend you're in Germany, Kadi, and try it. It's so good.
They have it in Estonia
Mostly-
as well. I've actually used it.
Oh, it's so good, isn't it?
It's very good.
Yeah, it's just the best. Okay, so we have one question here. From who do you want to speak, or do you want me to say it, man?
Yeah, so speaking of like haptics and animations, do you have some like accessibility guidelines or recommendations? How do you get started with this stuff? Because it's likely it's not the best idea to put these haptics and animations to every single place in the app. I think you have to be somehow careful or do it the right way for it to make sense.
Yeah, I mean, with animations, it's kind of used sparingly, so they should be complementary to your application, and also your application should be usable without them, which is the core thing. So it's kind of like creating a little transition. For example, if you open a menu, like you could just snap a menu open, right? You'd still get the same effect, but it's nicer for the user if you have some kind of slide. But in terms of haptics, so the haptics libraries have like a preset sound for info, error, and notification. So like an error, for example, like something went wrong, and it's usually like it's platform specific. So you have like kind of like a longer vibration. It's different from iOS and Android. So my recommendation would be to use that. So if there's an error in your application, like use the error type of notification rather than just doing a tab.
All right, thanks. Makes sense. We have some questions from YouTube, so let's see.
Yeah, we have one question, and yeah, what animation libraries do you use besides Reanimated? I'm assuming.
I've kind of gone all in on Reanimated too. So previously, I did use the animation library that's like built into React Native, which was kind of my go-to. But ever since Reanimated 2 came out and became kind of production ready, I've completely swapped to that. It's so much easier for new developers to pick up, and because it's hooks based, so the animation library built in React Native is declarative. So like you have to like the API for it is not easy to reason about if you're thinking in a React world. Whereas Reanimated 2, because it's hooks based, and you declare a value that you share, and then you have use animated styles, and like you can reason about the flow of animations. I would just recommend using that.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, please go ahead, and I will ask mine. Yep.
Okay, my main question: does the haptic thing from Expo does it attach to your settings on your phone? So if you have like some vibration stuff off, will it turn off?
Yeah. So if you have, for example, if you have an iPhone and you've turned off Do Not Disturb, then you don't feel it. Same for sounds.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Wait, hold on. That's for sounds. Sorry. It's for sounds. You turn on the sound. I think you still feel the vibration, but it is like using the native libraries. So I think if you turn off vibration on your phone, you won't feel it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
That was wrong.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask about animation, because it's very useful for web applications and sites as well, but it's not that much used. So do you have any recommendations for people doing web apps? I mean, how do you develop animation on that side of the fence? Because like we cannot use this nice library you have.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that it wouldn't translate to Expo Web, for example, because animations on the web are completely different. I mean, the only reason we have these fancy animation libraries is that you can't do CSS transitions. So I think if you're doing web development, you should go the web development route. As far as I know, there isn't any library that would do animations that would work on both native and web. But I'm happy to be proven wrong. So if you know of any, let me know.
All right.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I do think that we don't value CSS transitions enough. I've also used Framer, the library from Framer, React. I'm just gonna Google React Framer animations. It's the one most used. Framer Motion. I think it's the one that I've used for React that is the most. Like, I think more production ready because it's used by Framer, and also easier to use, as in like it also uses hooks and stuff like that. So for web, I would definitely recommend Framer Motion. They also have a fancy website. Okay, is anyone in the YouTube, Twitch, I don't even know where, does anyone have any more questions for Kadi? I think we are set to go to takeaways and cue the little video that, again, you go, here's the cute little video with the coffee. There we go. Okay. One of my takeaways is that apparently snapshot testing, like taking screenshot testing, can be fast, which I did not know. So that's something that is one of my takeaways. And now we can go clockwise and go to François for some takeaways that, yep.
Yeah, I mean, what I've learned from these two other talks is that React Native is not that different from React.
True.
And I should try that a bit more. Maybe make Vidshot work with iOS and Android emulators.
I do feel like for people like me and François who mostly do web, there is this type of like fear of doing React Native because you just think it's going to be so hard. And then you see a bunch of talks and it's about the same, it's kind of the same, but you're still like, no, it's still too hard. I'm still scared.
I actually used to be an Android developer, so it's not that scary to me, but you know.
This is the second.
It is very different.
Yeah. Kadi?
Well, if you make it work on iOS and Android, let me know. I would be keen to try that out. I guess one of the things I hadn't considered was from Gleb's talk, which was around doing React Native testing using React Expo Web, which is not something that I've ever considered before because I kind of put them in completely different boxes. So it's like either unit testing or device testing, and kind of nothing in between. So I'm really interested in trying that out.
And if I can share my takeaway, I noticed like doing this presentation that Expo is a great tool, like really great tool, but its logo looks like pants, like a pair of pants, kind of, right? If you look, like when you zoom in, right, especially like on my slide, and it's like, that's a weird logo, right? Why is Expo? I mean, why is this like even a thing? It's not one of its letters, I don't think. So take a look, right? But use it, right? While your application is running in a browser. See if you can test it there.
It does look kind of like a weird set of pants.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it looks like you're a set of pants if you're like a goalkeeper and you have to like stand like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a power pose, right?
Yeah, it's a power pose move. Like, I mean, maybe it's to make you feel, I think it's supposed to be a boomerang of some sort. Maybe someone from Expo can help us with that one day.
Yeah, JS bracket, just the one.
It is?
And tilted. I don't know.
Oh, okay. So it's either a boomerang, pants, or a bracket.
We need some clarity. We need
Yeah,
answers.
we need some more. And okay, I think we're gonna ask someone at Expo, and they were like, I don't know. It looked good. I liked it. If you don't like it, I'm like, I like it, but I want to know.
It's like upside down, V sign, right?
Yeah, you're like.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that though. I mean, maybe, who knows? But yeah. Okay, I think we actually are 7 minutes in schedule, which is impressive. Good job, everyone. Everyone did their talks on time, which, oh wait, we have 2 comments. Yeah. It's the exponent notation. Yeah. It's the exponent notation.
Oh, yes.
Amen to the rescue.
Kind of long for exponent.
I mean, yeah, but if you made it small, then you can't see it. Like you gotta. We used to call exponents. I had no idea.
Yeah,
that
but
kind of
the
makes
exponent
sense.
it has to be like subscript font, right? They made exponent the size of a letter, so it's like now like an angle sign more than exponent.
Pants. So now it's pants. Now it's pants. It used to be exponent. I guess it's the point of like it's easier to the exponent value, or something like that, probably.
You cannot spell exponents without pants. That's what I'm thinking.
You can also not spell exponent without expo. It works in all ways. Okay, I think that is about it that we have for now. Thank you you three so much for coming. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and giving these amazing talks. And yeah, I think that's all we have for now. We will be back in an hour and 35 minutes from now to have some more talks, and which these talks are going to be about scaling. So how to like design systems and structure and like stuff like that. So I hope you're all excited. And yeah, thank you so much for coming this morning / night / 5 p.m. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, everyone have a great day /